Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Legislative Action Committee. Glad to have you here today. We have a handful of folks already on. We anticipate some others joining, and as usual, we're going to move forward and anticipate that some people will join as we go forward. I want to turn it over to some housekeeping. We don't have Jason with us today, so Laurel is going to be filling in and providing the actual administration of the webinar. So if there's a problem, it's Laurel's fault.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Laurel. Happy New Year to those of you who we haven't spoken to yet in 2020. Thanks for joining us. As Eric noted, we are going to get started, and we are recording this webinar, so anyone who joins us late can go back and watch the beginning, or if you want to share this with anyone in your network, we will make that available on our YouTube channel shortly after today and send you out the link as well as notes so that you can share any of the content in today's webinar with your continuum of care, local planning body, people in your agency, other networks that you are associated with, anyone who really could benefit from learning more about the bills that we're following, the activities we're doing as part of our Legislative Action Committee. Some other housekeeping for anybody who has not joined us before or is not familiar with GoToWebinar. We do have everyone on mute just to kind of keep the background noise to a minimum, but we want to make this interactive, so please feel free at any time to use the chat box or raise your hand and let us know if you have something that you'd like to contribute to our conversation. All I ask is that if you raise your hand, I am assuming that you want me to unmute your phone. So don't use that feature unless you are in a place where there's no background noise, or we won't embarrass you. Don't be trying to use this feature in the bathroom, please. Otherwise, we will have time for Q&A as we go along, so send us your questions. And at the very end, we do have an opportunity for folks to let us know what's going on in your community. So I'm going to take a second and just put up the same poll that we launch every time, just reminding everyone that there is a chance to share updates and see if anybody would like to indicate that they would like to do that at some point towards the end of the call. So I'm going to leave this poll open for just a minute while I go through the rest of our housekeeping. Please take a minute to, just a second, to let us know if you have anything you want to report out at the end of the call. The rest of the housekeeping for GoToWebinar, we do have this PowerPoint as a PDF available as a handout. At the bottom of the dashboard on GoToWebinar, you'll see a handout option. You can download this PDF. I believe the link should be live there, or if you receive our email agenda in advance, the links that we will be showing you on the webinar are live there as well. So you should be able to click that through those to get to the actual bills that we'll be talking about. I also have our Breakfast of Champions nomination form. We'll talk about that later on in the call, but that's the second handout that you have available today. And it looks like we have at least one person who would like to report out at the end of the call. So whoever that is, just be prepared at the end to either type in your update or let me know if you want me to unmute you. And I'm going to go ahead and close that poll now. And we should be good to kind of get on with our agenda. One last note, we are having a little bit of connectivity issues with our wireless here in the office. So if you have any trouble hearing us, first send me a quick note using the chat to let us know that we're having audio problems. If it is our issue, then hopefully we can resolve it. But usually it is something on the user end, and so we use disconnect or hang up the back end. Figure it out.
You want to introduce? Guests
Hi, I think we have some issues with our audio and we are back. Can someone please send me a note and let me know if you can hear me now and if the volume and the clarity of the audio is okay? All right, I hear a couple of, or I see a couple of you saying it's okay. Is the actual volume and the quality good enough, or using my computer versus the phone now? All right, thank you to those of you who are sticking with us and dealing with the technical issues that we're dealing with here. So I think, hopefully you heard Haley and Eleanor introduce themselves. They are our new interns working on some specific policy work with us, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the call. Again, let me know if the audio starts acting up again, but we should be okay for now. So let's get started. Quick reminder of our agenda. This is our standing agenda. We like to do just some priority updates, talking about the stuff that we've identified as policy priorities for our work during the 2019-2020 session. Then we'll give you some state and federal updates, and then talk about all things MICA. And then after that is your opportunity to tell us anything that's happening locally. So as a reminder, our policy priorities for the 2019-2020 session. 2019 is over, but we're only halfway through the legislative session, which means we still have a little bit of time to push forward some of these agenda items. Unfortunately, we know this is also an election year, which considerably limits the amount of time in 2020 that we have to work on state legislation. But we're going to keep moving and see if we're able to at least advance some of these. So the first one that we're focused on is source of income protections. That is the ability to, or what we're hoping to be able to do is guarantee that anybody who receives a source of income, such as a housing choice voucher or SSI, SSDI, veterans benefits, etc., does not have to face discrimination when they're trying to access rental units within the state of Michigan. Right now, as many of you know, a landlord can just straight up deny to even meet with someone who has one of those sources of income and does not have to rent to that person. We are very lucky to have had 3 sponsors come up in the end of 2019 and sponsor legislation, 2 in the House and 1 in the Senate, that addresses this issue. So those are linked in the PDF that's attached as a handout. House Bills 5287 and 5288 have been introduced by Representatives Wittenberg and Robbie. They address this issue in 2 different ways. One, Wittenberg's bill addresses it by amending the Landlord Tenant Act. And the second one, the 5288, is Representative Robbie's bill that addresses this through amending Elliott-Larsen, our Civil Rights Act, by including source of income as a protected class. Senate Bill 687 by Senator Irwin goes the same route. It amends Elliott-Larsen. So both of these bills, or sorry, all 3 of these bills have been referred to similar committees. In the House, they've been sent to local government and municipal finance. In the Senate, they have been sent to local government. Unfortunately, we're not very optimistic that these bills are going to get a hearing this year, especially with Elliott-Larsen. Those are issues that our Republican legislature is not very keen on taking up. And so our goal for the next several months is to see if we can just educate our legislators about the value of source of income protections and start collecting relevant information such as testimonials and data that supports why protections are necessary for the state of Michigan. We'll be targeting these 2 committees and the members that are on these committees to see if we can at least get a hearing. We have a group of advocates who will be meeting semi-regularly on this, and several of you are still on the call, so I apologize that this is a lot of repeated information for you guys. But we discussed targeting the Senate a little bit more directly versus the House on this. We think it might be a little friendlier on that side, although as I said, not so optimistic about either. If you're interested in being part of that kind of ad hoc committee, let me know. Send me an email, or you can send me something on chat here, and we'll add you to the list. But we will be doing some direct work on that over the next couple of months. Our second policy priority is our landlord mitigation fund. Some of you may remember that this is an issue that was brought up during appropriations last year. Is the idea that the state sets aside a packet of money for landlords to access if they incur any damages or loss of rent by renting to certain tenants who would fit in a certain program criteria, such as someone with a housing choice voucher, someone with a criminal record, or a history of evictions, or other criteria that are to be determined. We've seen other states do this successfully. So we're hoping to have this introduced here in the state of Michigan with perhaps some innovative ideas to make it a successful program. We have some bipartisan interest in seeing this introduced this appropriation cycle. I'm hopeful that this is something that can move forward. If not this year, then again, targeting next year as well. We're still kind of in that education period of making sure we have everything that we need to make this a successful program. But just having the interest from both sides of the aisle is really positive for us and something that we want to continue to do. Vital documents, we have been following House Bills 4152 and 4153 for a while now. They were introduced in a previous session under different numbers, brought back in 2019. Very happy to announce that they have passed through all the hurdles in the House, and now they've passed through the Senate committee, and they will be introduced on the Senate floor soon. We are not expecting any opposition. It seems like this is going to be a pretty straightforward vote and something that we expect will pass through without any problems. That being said, feel free to go ahead and reach out to your senators and let them know that this is something that would be very helpful to the clients that you work with. 4152 and 4153, again, creates parity between the birth certificates that are held at the DHHS Central Registry and those that are held at the clerk's office, which would affect the cost and the timing of being able to access those birth certificates. We'll let you know when those pass out of the Senate and when they get signed by the governor. Finally, budget. We're back at the beginning of the year, which means we're back at the beginning of another budget cycle. The governor will be releasing her priorities here in the next couple of months. We hope that this budget cycle is a little bit easier than last year. Many of you followed that and know that there were a lot of issues with disagreements between the legislature and the governor's office, which delayed significantly the timeline and also created a bit of issue with the governor vetoing several items that we were supportive of. And so we're hoping this year we have a faster process, an easier process, and that some of the priorities that we have will actually move forward without any problems. Again, this year we're going to be focusing on the ESP per diem rate. We've had an increase for the past several years, but we're still significantly below the national average. So we are working with legislators on the House side and the Senate to try and get that introduced again this year for a higher rate. We're also working with the Michigan Network of Youth and Families to see the runaway and homeless youth programs funded at a higher level. That was one of those items that passed out of the legislature last year, but the governor vetoed. We're very excited to hear that not all of that money that was part of the increase last year was actually eliminated due to some boilerplate language. It looks like some of that money is being reinstated. So didn't reach the amount that they were hoping for. We're going to continue to support those efforts to see an increase in that fund specifically to try and get back up to the amount that really makes sense for our state. And I think that is it for the budget talks right now. We'll have some more items to kind of directly respond to once the governor releases hers and we make some more progress on some of our priorities. As we kind of go on to state updates, I will just acknowledge that if you have any questions or concerns or thoughts, send them to us in the chat box or raise your hand where you can come back to any of these issues and address anything that you have as we move forward. So let's talk a little bit more broadly about some state updates, some bills that have been introduced and some things that have been happening over the past couple of months. Just a quick update on two packages of bills that we've been following. The emotional support animals. This is something that we discussed at our last meeting, which I believe went all the way back to October. The House and the Senate both have packages that address the perceived issue of the abuse of the emotional support animals program. These would regulate more harshly the process of registering your emotional support animal and the penalties for those who incorrectly claim that they have an emotional support animal. The House bills were voted out of their first committee. The House has set up this session a two-tier process to where now bills have to pass out of one committee and then they go to one of two committees for a second hearing. So these bills are now in that second committee, which happens to be Judiciary. The Senate bills are still in their original committee, local government, and I know that there has been some really strong opposition from several of the advocates that we partner with and some folks on the phone today. So we can continue to monitor that and let you know what's happening. But obviously, this is an issue that we know would address those or would harm those folks who are trying to access housing who have legitimate need for emotional support animals. The second bill is a tax credit for charitable donations to food banks and shelters. This bill was reintroduced in the House under 4992 and 4993. 4992 is the bill that we are tracking and supporting. It directly reinstates that tax credit for food banks and shelters. 4993 reinstates the tax credit for donations to community foundations. So we are not actively participating on that bill, so these are taken kind of as a package. This was referred to tax policy in the House and heard in committee back on December 3rd. I have not heard anything more about this moving forward or what the chances are for this. But obviously MCAH and several of the shelters that we work with would support seeing this tax credit reinstated in the hopes that it would boost the number of donations that are received and our way of marketing and soliciting donations within this field. Next, we have our governor's poverty task force. This is a new thing that the governor initiated back in December. She signed an executive order, which is linked here in the PDF if you download it, that establishes a task force to really kind of look more directly at poverty in our state. Back when the governor was running, her campaign really did highlight poverty as something that she wanted to focus on as a priority. Unfortunately, it took 12 full months for her to come around to it, which we have some concerns about, but we're also glad to see it introduced now. The task force is going to be made up of several department heads of state agencies, and it's going to sit under LEO, the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department, which does house MSHDA. It will also have I'm now blanking on the name of it. It's going to have a council, an advisory council that is going to be made up of 3 legislators, 2 from an urban area and 1 from a rural area, as well as individuals who have direct experience with poverty. MICA's goal with this work in the task force is to really make sure housing and homelessness is prioritized. We strongly feel that that is an indicator and an issue with poverty. It doesn't matter how you talk about it, you have to talk about housing and homelessness. And so we are working with other state partners and advocates to make sure that this is an issue that is not ignored, that we have representation. We've offered to make ourselves available as a work group or as an advocate in any way that makes sense to the task force. And we're really hoping that this is something that leads to a better understanding at the state level about what we can be doing right now to address poverty, the factors that contribute to poverty, and how we can help people get out of poverty and into home. So we will continue to keep you updated. I believe there was a 45-day cycle by which the governor can appoint those to the task force. And so we're coming up about almost there with the 45 days coming to an end. So hopefully that will be announced soon if it hasn't already been announced who's on that task force, and they will be having their meetings soon. One thing that we are watching is that this does seem to replicate the Michigan Interagency Council on Homelessness, and so we do want to make sure that this is something that doesn't necessarily replace those efforts or contradict those efforts, and is really assisting and being complementary to the things that are already established and happening at that level with regards to the state departments working on homelessness and now poverty. Next, we have the Poverty and Homelessness Caucus, and this is something that just launched last week, though it has been in works for several months now. For those of you who attended our December in-person LAC meeting, you heard from Representative Brenda Carter out of Oakland County, and she announced that this was something that she was taking the lead on and that she would be moving forward on it soon. And she convened everyone along with the other co-sponsor, who is Senator Bayer, last week. So my understanding is that they had 40 RSVPs or commitments from 40 different legislative offices. It is bipartisan, it is bicameral, which means that we have Republicans and Democrats from both the House and the Senate participating in this. And their first meeting was really just a chance for them all to come together and talk about this issue, discuss what they wanted to accomplish with broad strokes rather than getting into the weeds. And moving forward, they really are going to be working with agencies like ours and other advocates to identify real practical solutions that we can be bringing to the state of Michigan to address homelessness and poverty. My understanding is that they really want to go big or go home. They're looking at really an expansive package of bills that enables all of those participating to sponsor as a primary sponsor a piece of legislation that will tackle this. So we are doing our research to see what we can recommend, not just our priorities, but what other items we can identify and recommend to this caucus. So I encourage all of you to work with us and let us know what's happening in your communities, especially if you represent a rural community, and let us know what issues you've been thinking about from the state legislative perspective that could be beneficial and that we should be educating them on and trying to move forward in this session. So I guess just to wrap that up, we're really excited and hopeful that it leaves summer really good, and are super pumped to hear that there's such strong support. 40 RSVPs to a first meeting is really remarkable. And so if anybody is in Senator Bayer's or Representative Carter's districts, please reach out and let them know how grateful you are for them taking this initiative and say thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Eric to do the final item on this state update list, the Michigan Campaign to End Homelessness Strategic Plan.
I just wanted to give you an update on that. I'm familiar with through the Michigan Policy Council efforts to develop a new 2-year plan to end homelessness. Most of you could be aware of that there has been a multi-year plan on homelessness. We've been operating with the campaign on homelessness, and so this is a plan to update 2-year focus. There has been
I'm so sorry to totally cut you off there, Eric. Everybody's saying they're having trouble hearing you. So I'm going to move my computer and see if that makes it any better. Sorry for anything like the computer right now.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. I apologize, I was sitting on the opposite side of the table with Laurel. So how is that? Can anybody send a message? Let me know whether or not you can hear me okay. That's better. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Well, I'm right in front of the computer, so it should be okay going forward. Let me start over. I'll skip over some of the adjectives to make it quick, but the Campaign to End Homelessness is overseen through the Michigan Homeless Policy Council. The council is working on an update to the multi-year plan that has been in place. There's been a fair amount of input from community individuals and organizations through some community events, electing feedback, and it's been pulled into a process of developing some priorities. Those priorities, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what the priorities are and what the timeline is for this, and then kind of put it into context with why we're talking about it here at the Legislative Action Committee meeting. So strategy 1 is increasing access to stable and affordable housing. Strategy number 2 is focusing on ensuring system diversion and homelessness prevention. That's a new priority. Number 3 is advancing cross-sector system alignment to impact other social determinants of health. And that is a modification of a priority that had been included in the previous plan. And then the 4th strategy is improving the quality of statewide service delivery system. And that is a new strategy as well. I won't get into the weeds on all of it, but I just want to let you know that those are in broad strokes, the categories that are being focused on, and a work plan is being fleshed out. That will be going to the Michigan Interagency Council on Homelessness for their review and sign off. Not sure when that will be. We're kind of waiting to see what level of feedback we need to still have to put this plan out for more feedback from the public again. But we may be looking at February's meeting for the plan actually to be put in front of the Interagency Council for their sign off. With that said, the reason that we're talking about it today is that there may be opportunities for policy work to be pursued through our organization or through LAC, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. There's nothing defined right now in the plan, but we anticipate there will be some areas where there'll be some commonality, and that we would want to be taking a lead on some of those activities and ensure that those individuals and organizations involved in the Campaign to End Homelessness are working with us with respect to our messaging and our approaches to contacting members of the House and Senate, et cetera, to carry some of those out. We also may find that during the course of the year implementation period that there may be other things that are identified that we're not currently working on
or that were not previously identified through this plan, that will actually be things that we may find that are timely and that we would be able to join in on. We may find that there are some things that are identified that may not be consistent with things that we're seeing as priorities, and we may not be able to work together on. But nonetheless, we want to make sure that we are paying attention to that. We will bring that back to you and try to make sure that there is that connection and you understand when those things are identified through the work on the plan, that we would then be talking about that internally and through LAC, whether or not that fits within our priorities and we have the bandwidth to be able to do those. I don't know if I should ask any questions. We'll have to take a look here as Laura runs around the table.
All right, sounds like we're still having a little bit of not seeing anything there. Are you good to move on to center updates?
Ready.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to kick things off at the federal level by talking about the change in leadership at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Most of you may be aware of the fact that the previous executive director, Matthew Doherty, left his position. There was some discrepancy in the interpretation of how that took place. Mr. Doherty indicates that he was basically asked to leave, though the administration may have a different take on whether or not he left of his own volition or was asked to leave. So that started an awkward transition. The new appointee, Robert Marbut, has taken over the position. And just wanted to kind of share with you in broad strokes without going into a lot of detail that there are some concerns about, number one, the forced resignation, or what's perceived as a forced resignation, but also about Marbut's appointment as it relates to some of the rhetoric that's come out of the White House that has dehumanized and degrading people with, that are homeless. As some of you may or may not have been paying attention to some of the language that's been used over the last 6 months as it relates to issues at the local level that the administration was weighing in on. Part of that, for example, has to do with proposing sweeps for homeless encampments. That just gives you an example of how that's being viewed at the administration's level. Marbut has worked as a private consultant in different communities. He has an approach that is being characterized as a velvet hammer that forces homeless persons into campuses, not camps, campuses, including one housed in a former jail under the threat of arrest. So again, what we're talking about is kind of dehumanizing and or making this something that's relating to legality and making it a crime for an individual to be homeless. So just as an example of one of the things implemented in the communities that he was promoting, there was an instance where people were moved into these campuses and had to sleep outside on mats to begin with, and could only move to an advanced room inside or with bedding if indeed they achieved success in programs that were provided to them. So again, very unusual in how it's being approached. I would say denigrating in a lot of ways to most people. So there are some concerns about it. We're cautiously optimistic that the focus of USICH and its priorities will not change, but we need to keep monitoring it because we do have some significant reservations about it. The National Housing Law Project does have a lot of information available on that if you want to take a look at. The National Low Income Housing Coalition as well has weighed in on it with an assessment. The National Alliance to End Homelessness also has a quick summary, the cautionary tale, I think, also about the concerns that they're raising about the new director. I could go on and on, but I won't. Sorry about that if I went on too long for you, but I just want to let you know that's something that is a cause of concern, nothing imminent that is take place as far as specific action, but I think that it kind of reinforces concerns we have about the kind of rhetoric coming from the administration in broader terms.
Okay, moving on. HUD affirmatively furthering fair housing. I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of the fact that HUD has been pursuing implementation of a newly proposed rule in 2015. A new rule was implemented regarding fair housing, looking at how do you take action steps at the local level to try to address the issues that are taking place, doing some analysis and trying to take action that is corrective in nature. The new rule is actually taking the previous name, but is really changing the approach, and in many ways is counter to what was intended by the original rule. Fighting for house justice, there is actually an initiative being undertaken where everyone as individuals and organizations are being asked to join in on it's not a sign-on, it's I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the language, asking you to basically put in your comments to HUD regarding the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. That's something we encourage all of you to do. There's a link that's provided in the agenda that you can follow to get more information on that, but we really encourage you to take part in that because this is a pretty important thing. We're very concerned about how the newly proposed rule will minimize oversight and accountability for entities that receive federal housing dollars with respect to their policies advancing housing opportunities for people who've historically experienced housing discrimination. We're concerned about it discounting the importance of public housing authorities' policies. That the new rule basically excuses housing authorities from conducting any meaningful fair housing analysis. We're concerned about the attacks on protections for tenants, workers, and environment. We really think that this new rule is disparaging important labor and environmental standards, and in many ways could be seen as a corporate giveaway. That the administration is using this proposal to attack labor and environmental standards under the guise of making housing more affordable. So you're hearing some buzzwords now about deregulation. There was recently some information that was put out regarding a bus tour that HUD's director, Ben Carson, will be undertaking, and that is being promoted as an effort to identify and basically eliminate what you would term as regulatory issues that might be preventing the development of affordable housing. In many ways, that's just a word choice that is a smokescreen. That's really not what is intended or what is needed. And so you see some of that language here in supporting this rule as well from the administration. And I think one of the important things that you really need to be paying attention to is it's eliminating key opportunities for local resident input. As we know, it's difficult at times for our voice to be heard with respect to HUD because it is a very large organization, and the public does have an opportunity to weigh in on rules, etc. And sometimes that gets drowned out. But when there is a significant response, they do pay attention to things. We find that this rule would also undermine that at the local level, that it would eliminate the separate hearing and comment requirement for fair housing issues at the local level, meaning that fair housing issues won't receive the individualized attention that they deserve. So we think this not only has federal impact, but it also has local impact going forward. So really encourage you to be submitting your comments through the initiative. Again, that link is there on the agenda. Okay, just a quick update on some new proposed legislation that has been introduced. Want to make sure that you're aware of it. The Public Housing Emergency Response Act has been introduced in the Senate, Senate Bill 3212. That was introduced by or is sponsored by Elizabeth Warren. Senator Elizabeth Warren introduced on the 16th. It authorizes additional monies for Public Housing Capital Fund for the Department of Housing and Urban Development and for other uses. So in essence, really what it's focusing in on is making sure that there are adequate resources for capital expenditures, which basically means the building of new housing and also supporting the upgrade or repairs on existing affordable housing.
public housing. Also, House Bill 5599, which is fulfilling the promise of the Housing Trust Fund Act. That is introduced by Representative Denny Heck out of Washington. It was introduced on 14th, an amendment to the Housing and Community Development Act of 1992 that requires the deposit of enterprise guarantees in the Housing Trust Fund and for other purposes. So in essence, what it's saying is we want to have an ongoing fixed source of income related to the Housing Trust Fund as opposed to a year-to-year or a piecemeal type of allocation. This would provide a more robust and funding source that had continuity. And then Senate Bill 3030, which is the Eviction Crisis Act of 2019, was introduced by Michael Bennett out of Colorado, introduced in December on the 12th. It requires the Secretary of HUD to establish a national eviction database and for other purposes. So this is really keying in on the eviction as what some people would consider the eviction crisis, and thinking in terms of how are we preventing evictions by providing adequate tools and supports for individuals who may be put in the position of facing an eviction, who may not have the information and or the resources they need to address the issue to remain housed when that's appropriate. And the Family Stability and Opportunities Voucher Act, Senate Bill 3083, was introduced by Senator Todd Young. And this is interesting because he's a Republican, but he does work quite closely with Sherrod Brown. Senator Sherrod Brown is our counterpart in Indiana, who is very active and supportive with respect to housing issues. So it's good to see both sides of the aisle and having two senators from the same state actually focusing on the issue. But it's authorizing a new housing choice voucher to achieve the goals of ending homelessness amongst families and children. So it's focusing in on families and children by increasing housing opportunities and improving life outcomes for children. So again, these are all introduced, and we're waiting to see whether their action takes place, but wanted to let you know that they are amongst the myriad of other bills that have been introduced over the last year that we think directly relate to housing, affordable housing, and the issue of homelessness as well. We'll keep you posted. And we'll check to see if there are any questions. Hopefully you were able to hear okay. I will continue. Mute for all the attendees, correct? Is that what that symbol means? We're not muted?
No, we're not.
Just, I want to make sure I'm interpreting.
No,
I'm seeing
you're
something
good.
floating on the screen on my side here, folks, that you can't see. So I want to make sure I'm not interpreting it incorrectly. So moving on to some MICA updates. This is an exciting thing for us. I want to talk about our Homes, Our Votes campaign. We're very pleased that we are the recipient of some funding to assist us in carrying out a project under the auspices of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. In essence, it's a modest grant to help facilitate some work, support some of the work that we've done in the past, and also branching out, doing some work beyond what we have typically done. But through next November, we're going to be spending some time building stronger relationships with state and federal candidates and mobilizing the advocacy base, including you folks and others, to register voters and to educate elected officials about Michigan housing and homelessness concerns. So we're looking at things such as candidate engagement. We're going to be elevating the existing candidate engagement efforts that we've been pursuing and creating some new opportunities for engagement in House districts and also at least one of the two Senate races. Want to Senate district. Wanted to make sure that you realize that we're going to continue to do some of the things such as the candidate surveys that we've done. We're going to be calling on you to be helpful with that and some other things. But we're also going to be branching out and looking at voter education more broadly than what we've done in the past. So we want to create some new educational materials as well as some opportunities centering on housing as a voter issue for partners and the public. So these are going to be basically materials that will help you with the talking points. What's the language that you can use to help the public or voters understand why housing is an important thing for them to be considering as a voter. Then we also have some voter registration activities that we're going to be pursuing. So we're going to use some existing and new opportunities to educate Michiganians about the new state election laws. We want to talk about same-day registration and no reason absentee voting. The goal is going to be to empower our partners in the field to register as many clients, staff, and volunteers as they're able to advance in advance of the general election. So got a whole bunch of activities going to be taking place under those broad strokes, but we're very excited. We do have 2 interns here in the office who are going to be carrying the water on that, so we're very excited to have them on board, and I know that they're excited as well. And if they're not intimidated yet by the breadth of information we've shared during this call, I don't know what will shake them. So again, this is a quick overview, and we are going to be calling upon you to be thinking in terms of how you and your organizations might be able to get involved with this and help to expand the reach and the impact of the project.
And then please excuse any of the noises that may hear while I move it back over to my side. And just because I want to irritate Eric, I'm going to say that we're very excited to engage with Michiganders on this issue. So, as Eric said, we do have several things that we're very excited to be doing with this grant, things that we are going to be trying to coordinate with all of you on. So I am going to put on your screen, we're going to see if anybody's still awake, to see if you can answer some questions about how you would like to participate in our Homes, Our Votes this year in Michigan. We have on the screen, or should be shortly, some items that we are hoping to make available throughout the state. This is a poll where you can select more than one item. Please let us know if you would like to participate in any of these ways. I'll go ahead and read it as you guys are looking at it, because I'm not seeing anyone answer them yet. Here we go. So some of the things we hope to make available that our fantastic interns are already working on are some voter registration materials, such as posters that explain how someone can register to vote. There are new laws in Michigan about registration and about absentee ballots. And so we want to make sure that everybody is aware of those new changes and knows how you can register to vote. Obviously, with the folks that we're going to be working with, those who are extremely low income, those who are experiencing homelessness, there are additional concerns about addresses and how you can access your IDs and polling locations. And so those are things that we're investigating and want to have very clear language on. We are also hoping to make available through a volunteer program select locations where we can actually have someone on site to register folks. Here we'll be targeting consumers or clients who are coming in to seek services, as well as volunteers and staff. Obviously, there are a lot of people in the state of Michigan who are able to vote who don't vote. And so we want to make sure that we are being very thoughtful about getting everyone engaged in this issue of housing and homelessness, registered and able to vote if they are interested in doing so. We are also going to be making voter education materials. So part of this process is not just to get people registered, but to make sure they understand why they should be voting this election year. And so the materials that we'll be providing will have information about why they should be voting and why housing is something they should be talking to their candidates about. As Eric said, we're going to be doing a survey. So we are hoping that we can engage with all of you to contact your candidates, to get them to fill out that survey once we make it available. And then in certain targeted districts, we are going to be hosting fun. So it looks like I haven't had any responses in a while, so I'm going to close this poll and just take a look. It looks like we have lots of folks who are interested in participating in several of these activities. So thank you. This is an anonymous poll, so I am not able to go back and see who answered and selected which items. So I'm not going to be able to follow up with you directly based on your answer, but if you would like to follow up with me and you have something that you're just itching to get started on, shoot me an email. Let me know what you're interested in and how you think we can coordinate and collaborate. And we are already working on several of these items, so we can start doing things pretty quickly. And let's go ahead and do a couple other quick MICA updates. We are going to keep you darn near the full hour today, so let's wrap it up and get you back to your regularly scheduled day. Spring is really busy for us. So not only are we doing Our Homes, Our Votes this year, but we are hosting our 4th annual Homelessness Advocacy Day. I know several of you on the call have attended in the past. I am hopeful that everyone on the call is considering attending and registering if you're able to be here in Lansing on March 11th. It is a full day. We start at 9 a.m. with a couple hours of education, and then we start putting you in meetings with your representatives and your senators who actually talk about issues and ask them to take a stand on some of the priorities that we've already talked about and that we'll be developing for the rest of the year. So I do have the registration link on here. It's kind of a long bit.ly, but we also have that embedded in the agenda and in the PDF if you download it. So you can go directly to our registration page. We do have some additional costs this year. We have outgrown our traditional location, so we've had to go to a new venue, which charges us, which means that we have to charge you guys. The modest fee is $20. If you are a MICA member, we offer a 50% discount, and I can help you with registering with that discount code if you are interested in a member. Or if you're not a MICA member, or if you're not sure if you're a MICA member, you can shoot me an email and I can look it up for you and help you out. We also are trying to encourage folks with lived experience to come out and tell their story. We know it takes both numbers and stories to really move our legislators, because we don't want to cause any undue financial burden to those folks. If you have experienced homelessness, you do not have to pay to attend. You still have to register so that we can set up your meetings, but there is an option to register free of charge for those who have experienced homelessness. So if you are a service provider and you work with a handful of folks who you think would just be amazing at coming to Lansing and telling their story, you can register them without any fee. If there are any questions about the content, about the process, if you're nervous about an advocacy day, let me know. I'm happy to walk you through it. We have had anywhere from like 50 to 125 people attend. So I know that there are, oh, I just realized I probably still had something on the screen that you guys weren't able to see, this screen with the Homelessness Advocacy Day image. So I apologize for that. Let me get back to this now. If you are wanting to participate, let me know. I'm going to put up another poll so you can let us kind of know visually here how many folks are interested, plan on attending, or are not sure yet. So take a quick second, let us know if you think you'll be able to attend on March 11th here in Lansing. We will be holding 2 webinars in advance. We have already scheduled, though I failed to put down the date of our first webinar, which is going to be an Advocacy 101 session with the Michigan League for Public Policy. We've worked with them to present to you guys some of their materials to get you comfortable with advocacy and with the process of how legislation occurs at the state and federal level. So it's a really great overview. Once we have that actually scheduled, I will send out that information. And then a second webinar in advance of Advocacy Day will talk about our actual priority issues and the talking points and share with you the materials that we'll be giving to our legislators that day. So we do everything we can to make you guys as comfortable as possible in advance of March 11th. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Looks like we have a pretty good split with 50-ish% of you. Someone snuck in and reduced it to 46% of you now plan on attending, with a lot of you unsure. So if that is because you're not sure about your availability, look into it. If it's because you're unsure about whether or not you want to participate, the next big activity for MICA, if I can advance the screen here, is our Breakfast of Champions. This is going to be on May 28th, again, here in Lansing. It is our annual event. Oh, apologize. There we go. Is our annual event to honor those working in the field of homelessness through recognizing 4 champions who are doing just fantastic work out there. So we are in the process of accepting nominations. The link to the nomination form is on the screen, as well as attached as a handout in GoToWebinar. The nomination deadline is February 7th, 5 o'clock that Friday. Please take a look and see if there's anybody who you would like to honor this year. We have 4 categories. We have our community champion, our volunteer champion, our advocacy champion, and then we actually have a 4th champion that is very specific to this group, the Legislative Action Committee champion. This is someone who this committee and our staff works with who doesn't necessarily fall within our traditional partners. And they are working directly on the policy priorities that we have established and that we talk about on our monthly calls. The previous honorees have included clerks who have worked directly on the state ID, passing that legislation, and initiating programs that made it more accessible and reducing the fees for those who are experiencing homelessness to access their state IDs. Last year, we honored a legislator who helped pass the legislation that created the free ID program for individuals experiencing homelessness. And so we know that there are a lot of folks out there who are really partnering with us and making things happen at the state level to make it easier for our folks to get out of homelessness and escape the poverty cycle. And this is our chance to honor them and recognize them. It's very helpful if we get those nominations directly from the Legislative Action Committee. So I encourage all of you to download this form, take a look, and nominate someone for any of the categories, but think specifically about that Legislative Action Committee category. And then there is, I believe, also a link embedded in here to go to the registration page so you can register for the event. Obviously, we want you to attend the event on May 28th here in Lansing as well.
Bring people.
And bring a friend. It is actually quite a fun event. It's a good chance to network and just take a break and kind of acknowledge that the work we're doing is hard. And some days it feels like we're moving the needle more than others, but we definitely all deserve a chance to stop and recognize the work that's being done. All right, we've got 8 or 9 minutes, and I know at least one of you said that you wanted to report out at the end of this call about things that are happening at the local level. I was going to do it at the end. Oh, okay. Nope. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So, does anybody have anything that they want to report out at this point about things that are happening at the local level? I know someone had to jump off the call, and so we may have missed the person who had some items to discuss. But take a moment, send me a message or raise your hand so I can unmute you and let us know what's happening with regards to programs or initiatives and policy happening in your community. While you are taking a moment to consider whether or not you want to update anybody or typing out your message, we are announcing that we are changing our regularly occurring meeting. We have, for the past year, maybe year and a half, been meeting on the 4th Monday of the month at this time from 12 to 1. And we have a decent turnout of folks who are able to attend. But we have some issues here internally that we're trying to kind of redo our schedules, and so we're looking at changing that. We are proposing that we are going to move to the first Monday of the month, still from 12 to 1, so still during your lunch hour. But this just allows us to kind of be a little bit better coordinated internally so that we can report out some better information to you guys each month.
Reason, this informed and bring that will will be important to show that internal scheduling issue.
All right, thanks, Eric. So our next meeting will be on March 2nd. So obviously we're not going to meet the first Monday of the month of February. We'll cancel our meeting, move to March 2nd. Those of you who are registered, obviously, webinar, update those meeting times and please adjust your calendars if you have this now this Monday. And I apologize, it looks like we're having a little bit of audio issues, so hopefully you can hear us. If not, let me know. But I do want to acknowledge it. Thank you for letting kind of this. It is when everybody is out doing the job. Kristen just wants to share everyone who's going out there doing their work and for the funding that we're able to access. So thank you very much. Apologize for anyone who's having trouble hearing us here at the end. We'll send out notes following up, and we'll go ahead and let you guys go 5 minutes later. But thank you so much for taking a look at our audio problems. Have a good rest of your Monday, and we'll meet with you guys in about 5 weeks.
Sure.